Welcome to A Canadian Investing in the U.S., a podcast and YouTube channel focused on Canadians buying real estate with host Glenn Sutherland.
Welcome to another episode of A Canadian Investing in the U.S. This week I want to tackle the topic I have all the time that's always brought up. If I only have a small amount of money, does it make more sense to buy one rental property in cash or one rental property financed? So let's try and dig down into this. There's a lot of different parts. I have lots of notes here to go over. So let's try and break that down. What makes the most sense to do? It's not a cut and dry sort of answer that you can just base it on one thing, which is what I often hear is people base it strictly on cash flow or whatever. There's a lot of different things. Right now, as everybody knows, we're going through coronavirus, right? So let's start with liabilities. So for the hypothetical problem we're trying to break down, let's talk about $35,000 US in cash. But a lot of people aren't actually dealing with cash, even when they talk about cash. So in our hypothetical, we're going to say we're using a line of credit from Canada. So we're going to say that line of credit is, $45,000 or $50,000, whatever that works out to in American. I have not done that math. So, and you know what? Someone might listen to this podcast in a year and it might be at par. So anyway, $35,000 US you have. $35,000 we're going to use just because it's a nice number that works good into a lot of things. So you have $35,000 US. Let's first talk about liabilities. So we're in coronavirus time, like I said. What's the difference? Well, either way, you have that $35,000 liability. So you're going to have to pay that line of credit payment no matter which strategy you're doing. So you have that payment, so that's even. The difference is if you're financing that $35,000 into, say, a $100,000 property, that means you have a $65,000 loan as well in the U.S. And if you have that, so you're going to have to pay that mortgage as well. So the big problem with coronavirus is, are these tenants going to pay during this situation? Right now, we haven't heard about any tenant bailouts yet, at least I'm not aware of. I know there's some talk about the banks giving some breaks and stuff, but that may not apply to us as Canadians in the States. So let's throw that all out the window. What if your tenants stop paying? Well, you're going to be on the hook for that $65,000 loan that you took on that $100,000 property. So that's one difference. That's one simple thing to talk about. So $65,000 loan, let's say it works out to like $500 or $600 a month. That's $500 or $600 a month US that you may be on the hook for if you're doing the difference. So maybe if you're very conservative, that may make more sense to go with an all cash purchase, especially during the coronavirus time. But anyway, there's a lot of things to tackle here. That's one thing. You are going to have more liability by using leverage. But one thing we're kind of skipping over is the pillars of real estate, right? Like, why are people buying rental properties to start with? Why do real estate? Well, appreciation. Appreciation you're going to get in both kinds of properties, right? Actually, we'll just go over the four things quick, and then we'll come back and drill down into each one. Appreciation, depreciation, mortgage pay down, and cash flow are the main four. So if we're going to do appreciation, which properties are going to appreciate more? We all know this. Appreciation is going to go to the more $100,000 style properties. They will appreciate at a higher rate. They're in a better market. That's why they're $100,000, the other ones are $35,000. At one point, they were a lot closer. And over time, as appreciations are higher in better neighborhoods and lower in other neighborhoods, that's why it'll slowly get the gap keeps getting bigger and bigger between these properties. And that's why there's $35,000 neighborhoods and $700,000 neighborhoods. It's the appreciation level is at different levels, and it's just going to get way out of whack. So you will get higher appreciation with the $100,000 property. Not cut and dry still. Depreciation, basically the same. That's a wash. We're not even really going to tackle that. Mortgage paydown. Are you going to be making equity from the $35,000 cash? Nope. You're not going to get any appreciation. You're not going to get any mortgage paydown when you're dealing with those. So, but this isn't the whole game, right? We're not in the business of just looking for appreciation, are we? So the bigger thing is cash flow. Which properties are going to cash flow better? The number one real reason of like how it's going to cash flow is how good of deal finder are you? That's number one, right? But if you're depending on what your deal level is, basically a $35,000 property will cash flow better than a $100,000 property. I've talked about this in, I think, basically anytime I do a full rundown of rent to value ratios. And as the as the price goes down, the rent goes up in perspective. So say like a $35,000 property may rent for $700, whereas a $100,000 property may rent for $1,000 or $1,100 around the 1% rule, right? It all depends on how good deal finder are. I do way better than that. But like as a general rule, if you're just looking on the MLS, that is what you'll find. So you will cash flow better as using the cheaper properties. So is this cut and dry? No, we're still not there. The tenant class. This also kind of goes to the coronavirus, back to that. So why does that matter? Why would coronavirus have anything to do with tenant class and $35,000 property versus a $100,000 property? It's true that more of the people who are living in the $35,000 type houses are hourly, whereas people who are in the $100,000 property that are renting these properties, and you're making sure your property manager is getting like 3 times the rent, right? So they're renting these properties for, we'll just use basic, $1,000 a month. So they're making at least $3,000 a month US. So they're likely on salary, right? So how does that play out? A lot of times during this coronavirus, people are still getting paid if they're on salary. Whereas hourly, if you don't show up, you don't get paid. So there may be a little bit more liability with having these $35,000 price houses. So it's a toss-up, right? Because we just literally just talked about the opposite thing, right? That it was a little, you have less loans to deal with by having the $35,000. So it's whatever is what's important to you is the main thing. Next thing, can you refinance? Which of these properties can you refinance? This is another important thing for real estate, right? Like you want to grow your portfolio. If you only, especially if you're starting and you only have $35,000 US, if you go buy this $35,000 property, you got cash, you got a nice cash flow, especially because you don't have any leverage on it. You have a higher rent to value ratio. But how do you get your second property? I don't know. You're basically stuck. It's going to be really hard, really hard to refinance a $35,000 property. So that's going to be very difficult to do. So throw that out the window. You got the $100,000 property. You got a $65,000 loan on it. You know, basically, if we're talking about turnkey, it's going to be still hard to refinance. You're basically going to be hoping that the market goes up and you make some more equity that you can refinance again. I'll get into what I do at the end, but you can still refinance. It is in the acceptable rate, the range of purchase prices or value that you can refinance at. So that might be valuable to be thinking about that, because you just have more options. And maybe, say you're stuck at the 65% loan to value. Well, maybe you can find, once you got some more experience, they'll offer you a loan that's cheaper. Like, so maybe you're started off at 7 or 8%, and then after a couple of years of investing, you can get a loan at like 5 or 6%. So, hey, that's another way to refinance, get some money out, or at least bring your cash flow up. So it's an option. You have that option by buying the more expensive property. Renovation. So can you renovate both these properties? Obviously you can. But a $35,000 house, if you go and drop $40,000 into it, you're like at $75,000. That neighborhood may not support $75,000. The same thing happens with the $100,000, but there is a little bit more wiggle room as you get into those neighborhoods that you might be able to force some appreciation. But it's going to be trickier with the $35,000 cash. And you're not, like I said before, refinance isn't going to matter because, You can't refinance that $35,000 property. So you might be able to put some more money into it, raise the rent up, but your money's still stuck in the property. Another thing to think about is these neighborhoods, right? Because like I touched on this before, but a $35,000 neighborhood versus a $100,000 neighborhood, well, why are these properties $35,000, right? Something to think about. Well, we talked about a few things, like the appreciation rates are different and everything else. But in all likelihood, the big driving factors for these neighborhoods is crime in school zones. So you're going into higher crime zones and low-rated schools. So you're going to have, remember that's what you're getting for tenants too. People are going to be more drawn to going to the higher school zones. They want to live in the higher school zones. They want their kids to go to the best school or a decent school in town. And school zones are different than Canada. Canada is pretty close on the level. Like, there's not much difference between schools. There is differences. I know. Some of them are newer, some of them, but not like in the US. There is massive differences between the schools. So that's another thing to think about, who you're getting in these properties. Another touch. And all of these things. So we've been kind of talking about buy and hold real estate this whole time. But that's not the only strategy that people use for real estate. There's lots of strategies, right? I'll touch on some, like 4 of these here that I just wrote down. So a lease option. Does a lease option work in both of these strategies, right? Now that we're getting into, we've been listening to this podcast for a while, we're starting to get into some more higher level strategies. Lease option. Does it work for both? Well, yeah, it does. The only thing that concerns me with doing a lease option, which I touched on with the interview with Brooke, is if you have a $35,000 property and you do a lease option, say you're asking for 10% down, you're not asking for much money, right? You're really asking for like $3,500 for the lease option, for the option off the start, the deposit. So they have skin in the game, but not enough, right? And the problem is if they can't pay you because their job or whatever, and we saw this firsthand when we were in Kansas City, that what tenants could do when they don't have the money is sell the furnace, sell the water heater, sell stuff in the property to pay you your lease your lease payment every month, so that they don't lose their lease option deposit, and then they realize they get themselves in such a bad spot that, well, why do they even want this property? It doesn't even have a furnace or a water heater. We went into properties that they don't have a water heater because they sold it. They don't have a furnace because they sold it. So what happens is they just walk away, and you go, well, I got $3,500 as my option off the start, the deposit, and you go, well, furnace is probably going to cost me that. Water heater is going to cost me. I'm going to be over. I'm going to lose money by doing this. So it's a little bit scarier. So, on the flip side, maybe I just charge more. So I'm going to charge $10,000 as a deposit on a $35,000 house. Wait, you're up at like 25% you're asking down. Why would they do that? They can go to the bank and get a loan on a property. They could go get an FHA loan, which is like 3% down. Why would they put 25% down for your house? It better be amazing. And why would they do that? Why would they want to put that in? People who have $10,000 like to leverage, especially tenants if they're going into their first house. They don't want to live in a $35,000 house if they have $10,000. They're going to leverage that. They'll go get a 3% down FHA loan, and they will go buy a $150,000 house. That's what they're going to do if they're the kind of people that have saved up $10,000. So that lease option, it's not very practical. Lease options more, it makes more sense to do with a more expensive property. You can ask a little bit more money up front. You have people who are in a better school zone. They're going to want to stay in the school zone. They want their kids to stay in the school zone. They have a little bit more riding on the whole thing. Okay, let's move on to flips. Can you do flips in both neighborhoods? Yeah. Like, same thing when we're talking about school zones, crime, everything. It will be easier to do in a $100,000 neighborhood. You can do flips anywhere, though. You just got to remember that a market caps out at a certain rate, a certain price. So you can really only go so high. The same thing happens in a $100K neighborhood. It's just as you get the opposite, is when you're doing flips, as you get into more expensive neighborhoods, there's more gap from one house to the next house. Like in some of the cheap neighborhoods, really they're all 30 dilapidated, 40 fixed up. But it varies. Every neighborhood's different. But so you move up in price and say a $100,000 neighborhood, $100,000 is dilapidated and $200,000 is fixed up. So there's a little bit more room for doing the flips in there, but you could do it in either neighborhood. And we've actually done it in both neighborhoods. Totally doable. Buy and hold. Yeah, obviously. We just talked about it. You can do both sides. There isn't a right answer. Both ways work. I don't know. It depends what's important to you. There's a lot of advantages to doing the more expensive ones, but there's a lot more cash flow by doing the lower ones, and it's a little bit easier to get the high cash flow. You better be a good deal finder to buy them at $100,000, because you're just buying turnkey properties. You're going to get your 10% and the 1% rule, and if anything breaks, you didn't make any money. So I personally think you need to have more buffer in there, but you still do well. You'll still do better buying turnkey in the States than turnkey in Canada. So let's talk about BRRRRs. The BRRRRs are going to work. You know what? They work both. They work good with both. And it's hard to say define it based on purchase price, because it's like what the actual value is. We're doing one right now with a BRRRR with a lease option, and we bought, just for some rough numbers, we bought it for $35,000, a reno of $15,000 to $20,000, and we had our refi pegged at $90,000. We had some problems with appraisals, so we got an appraisal for $120,000, which wasn't a good appraisal because you can't actually sell it for $120,000. But we're putting it into a lease option at $100,000, so that is a $35,000 property that we've turned into a great deal. In my opinion, anyway. I don't know what your deal criteria is, but for us, we can perfect BRRRR that when the reno's done, which it is, and we're working on the refi, and we can get a nice chunk of cash when it sells, when the lease option's done as well. So the JV gets all their money back, or not my JV, my partners, they get the money back, and it works good for everybody. So that one, it can work. And that was the $35,000 property. So do BRRRRs work on $35,000 properties? Absolutely. Do they work on $100,000 properties? Absolutely. I think you can do this with both. And I think it's really about running your numbers and making sure that it all makes sense. A lot of these times, if you're just buying stuff on the MLS for what it's actually worth, it's hard to make any of this stuff work. I don't know. There is stuff on the MLS that you can find deals, but you need to get a deal. Like a deal is, this is going to side rant altogether, but a lot of people call a deal just the purchase of a property is a deal. A deal should be a great deal. So you need to be buying it at a discount. You need to be buying at a discount. So this isn't what I was planning on covering on this episode, but I thought I should touch it. So if I want to find a deal, I'll just tell you straight up what my criteria is. I tell my wholesalers, because you'll talk to wholesalers too, and they'll say, what's your deal criteria? And I'll say, I want a property so formula for them, find what the after repair value is. I want it at 65 cents on the dollar, and then subtract the renovations, and then subtract a buffer for if things go bad. And so basically, a $100,000 property, $65,000 minus $20,000 reno, $45,000 is the most I'd pay for that property, plus some reno, some closing cost money, and some if stuff goes wrong money. So yeah, I want a $100,000 property for like $40,000. Are you going to find that on the MLS, even dilapidated? It's going to be tough, and it's probably going to have to be really dilapidated, and you better know what you're doing, because they have things we don't have as much of up here, like termites. We've been running into those. Anyway, there's my completely side rant. So in conclusion, $35,000 house or $100,000 house with 35% down? Which is better? I buy both. I think the real answer is to buy both. Diversify. I always say this with mutual funds, diversify. Have different things. Have ones that cash flow but have this disadvantage. Have ones that have a little slightly less cash flow, but they have more advantage on this side. Maybe you'll get some appreciation. One get cash flow. And if you can balance the whole thing, it'll make your life a little less stressful. So I think that's my personal philosophy, is to have both. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Tune in again next week. If you need to contact me, it's Glenn at glensutherland.com. Thanks, everybody.